can you imagine the kind of instability and the lack of peace that would exist in that world? Because all you would have would be a bunch of powerful people that are aware that the rules of the game really aren't binding, but we're going to, from time to time, agree to abide by some social contract or global contract.
I think human flourishing is probably going to be a very poorly defined idea in that worldview, because we have to then understand, what does it mean to flourish? How many human beings need to flourish? Right? So let's look at it let's take it out of human relationships and go to chimpanzee relationships for a second, right? If you look at how chimpanzees treat, I'm not a fan of chimpanzees. I think that they're violent, horrible creatures, and probably you watch videos of them, but they go to war. I always hear this: human beings are the only animals that go to war. It's ridiculous. Chimpanzees do, and they're much better at it than us, as far as they don't care at all about the people that they're attacking, the other chimpanzees, when they just destroy them and fight them, and so something like that makes more sense then, in the sense, well, how does one troop flourish? It kills the other troop. How does one chimpanzee family flourish? Well, it destroys those who were going to be in opposition to their collection of resources. Flourishing then becomes something in that world, a dynamic that's just whoever has the power to be able to eliminate, because I don't even see at that point why it would be necessary to bring in, unless, of course, if you look at some of the great empires of the past, like the Persian Empire, to some degree or another, the Roman Empire did these similar things. Alexander certainly did similar things, where it's just, I don't want to fight all the time. So if I defeat you and take you over, you get to live in my community, as long as you just abide by the rules and recognize that you're now my citizen and not a citizen of what group that you were before. But then it becomes a question, well, what is flourishing? How many people have to flourish? How many people have to destroy to get to that flourishing? It doesn't take into account an individual life. It starts to look at human beings as a collective. And there's a great book that's trying to understand objective morality. And Mark Linville was one of the contributors. So it's one of those 4 views of morality. And I wish I could remember the other 3, but they're looking at it and trying to understand how we can understand the existence of morality in our world. Is it fake, or is it something that we just do? And then one of them is that idea of it connected in some way to a larger flourishing of a group. And Mark Linville, I thought, pointed out something very interesting in his essay there. He talked about the idea that, let's look at rape then, because any concept of flourishing that doesn't have within it some idea of the dignity of the individual human being is going to understand the wrongness of rape and how it contributes or takes away from the flourishing of the whole. And so as you look at all of these different moral views that were offered in that book, every one of them had some explanation tied to some concept of human flourishing and the betterment of society for why something like rape would be wrong, but only one that recognizes the independent dignity of that human being that was violated can ground the wrongness of rape in the violation of that individual. And which, by the way, again, starts to make all that other things feel like they are too weak to handle what we're talking about. Because any definition of why rape would be wrong that doesn't center on the idea that that human life was wrong, that that particular woman or that man, whichever was raped, they were wronged. It was a violation of their dignity that they hold equally with all other human beings. It's shared across all humanity. They have a dignity that idea of the intrinsic value of a human life, right? And the violation of that individual is grounding the wrongness of it, not because it would be wrong for a lot of people in society to be raping each other, not because it wouldn't contribute to human flourishing. And so there's concepts of it that become, I remember one time hearing somebody describe reading Noam Chomsky as trying to hold mercury in your hand, that his arguments are slippery and they're moving all over the place. And I feel like when you talk about human flourishing, it's going to have a similar idea, right? That it sounds great when we talk about it as an answer to this problem, but at the end of the day, the more we try to lock down on a clear understanding of what flourishing is without some guidelines that are giving to us from a transcendent idea of what we were meant to be, it's going to be like trying to hold mercury. It's just going to slip from us in every direction.
Well, it's one of the inherent flaws in utilitarian ethical frameworks, right?
Yeah.
What is happiness? Is it shared equally? How do you measure it and then move it to well-being, which is what Sam Harris has done. He's the end of the line here up to this point in history of these consequentialist utilitarianists. And right, it's a bit elusive. And part of my problem too is kind of like the self-awareness of let's assume for the sake that's true, that evolution did condition us to think this way. Well, I'm now aware of it. Why am I bound to that morality? Beyond self-serving interests. So it becomes an ethical framework that at its core is selfishness.
Yeah, and it's going to be a power move anyway. I think Bill Craig talks about the idea of that you can account for the existence possibly of objective values, but you can't get to accountability or duty. You
Right.
you can just get through this idea that they exist in some abstract realm, and in some Kantian sense, if I were reasonable, I would ascend to want to be reasonable and to recognize their existence. But Craig says there's no reason to, right? I mean,
Which
there's
you
no.
can you imagine the kind of instability and the lack of peace that would exist in that world? Because all you would have would
Yeah,
be a bunch of powerful people that are aware that the rules of the game really aren't binding, but we're going to, from time to time, agree to abide by some social contract or global contract. That's a social contract that covers the whole globe,
yeah.
only as far as it serves my interests.
No, heck yeah, yeah.
So when would you ever go to sleep having any sense of peace? Now you might go, that's the world we live in right now. But at least in the world that we're in, there is the hope for peace because of the
Yeah.
belief in something objective that we can all come to know and agree to live by, something that grounds our deepest hopes and desires and fears in the sense of evil. It grounds it in something real and objective, not something that's only real in a subjective sense. So, yeah, I'm with you, and we could spend a ton more time here. To me, the problem of evil.
There is one more thing I wanted to say about that really quickly, though, because what you just said, I think, leads us to sort of the humanist experiment, right? The idea that if we can just see that humans bring meaning from from human beings themselves, that we generate meaning for our existence, and we don't need a transcendent source for that value or those rules. And I wanted to bring it up because I've always thought it was funny. I grew up, my dad was a huge Star Trek fan. And so he and I watched like the original series, he had it all on tape. We would go to the movies together. He loved Star Trek, which is a big humanist manifesto, right? That we're going to unite humanity and ultimately go out and explore the universe. But he and I would joke about it because he was still somewhat captivated by the ideas of Roddenberry and hope for humanity through this humanist experiment where we'd find meaning within ourselves and see beauty in our flaws and all that stuff, which is one of the recurring themes in the conversations. Like, yes, we're flawed, but we're beautiful. Our flaws make us beautiful, which is, anti-Christian in this sense, because our flaws are sins against God and ultimately we need redemption. And so you see the conflict between them. But what always cracked me up about the Star Trek universe was that this utopian vision of humanity finally uniting and launching ourselves out into space so that we can then go to war with other beings, right? I mean, it's like we're now united, so let's go find other people, and if they disagree with us, we're going to go to war with them, and like the Klingons and the Romulans and the Borg or whatever. We finally got over our problems here on Earth and united in this humanist utopia, so that we can then unite and take on enemies.
Find other people we got problems with.
That's right. Let's go kill them now. That we're all you're never gonna escape a sort of tribalism that comes with that worldview. It's just always going to be there. Tribalism will ultimately take over because sooner or later there's going to be some conflict of flourishing in societies, and then the only way to settle that will be power.
I think that's why tribalism is on the rise in the United States right now, and probably not just here, but certainly, Americans are feeling that we're growing in tighter and tighter groups, these silos where we don't want to have anything to do with people that are not a part of this group. And it is related to this when you don't have that shared vision of something transcendent that grounds meaning and purpose. All that is left is power.